Erev Shabbos. Once upon a time, before Lord Jonathan Sacks was a lord, before he became chief rabbi of the United Synagogue of the UK and the Commonwealth, he was a shul rabbi in Golders Green, later Marble Arch Synagogue in London. Now, shul rabbis, every so often, will venture outside their area of expertise, beyond Torah, Talmud, Jewish law, commentaries, ethics, and give into that temptation to talk about popular culture. It's always shaky ground when it goes there. So, young Rabbi Sacks took the opportunity of a Shabbat sermon to rail against a new film that had come out called Life is Beautiful, an Italian film with Roberto Benigni, a comedy about the Holocaust. Remember that one? Seems like it was about 10 or 12 years ago, right? How long ago was it? Almost 30 years, 1997. Anyway, Rabbi Sacks said about this film that it is not possible or appropriate to make a comedy about the Holocaust. The Shoah, he said, is no laughing matter. Now, fast forward to the Kiddush that Shabbos. The rabbi is approached by a member of the shul. That shul member happened to be a Holocaust survivor. Now, at the Kiddush, that's where the rubber meets the road. You learn a lot about life there. So the survivor comes over to Rabbi Sacks and he said, as Rav Sacks recounted the story, "You are wrong," he said to me. And then he told me his story. He and another prisoner in Auschwitz had become friends. They reached the conclusion that unless they were able to laugh, they would eventually lose their will to live. So they made an agreement. Each of them would look out every day for something about which they could laugh. Each night they would share their findings and laugh together. A sense of humor, said the survivor, looking me in the eyes, kept me alive. Reflecting on this later, Rabbi Sacks wrote, "I cannot say I understand such courage, but I found it awe-inspiring." Please accept that story in lieu of an opening joke. Although there may be some Holocaust jokes, none came to mind. And in this climate, frankly, I'll confess I was afraid to Google Holocaust jokes for fear of what the internet may have provided. This past week provided a bit more than I'm used to in terms of remembering Jewish suffering. On Sunday, a number of us visited the Auschwitz exhibit at the Ram, and Thursday, yet another encounter at the Nova exhibit, which I'll try to articulate. These are not events which usually catch my attention, in all honesty. It seems to me that in our kehillah, in our shul, we are living real Jewish life here, and it's all positive. In our shul, we learn, we laugh, we eat, we dance, we sing, we celebrate, we sing some more, we eat some more. We complain about a few things, but mostly it's for fun. When we're here, and really at home too, we are living a real Jewish life. This is the real thing. We're not some museum exhibit. Doesn't get the headlines, doesn't draw media attention, which is probably a good thing. We just do our Jewish thing and we enjoy it, hopefully. So you may ask, what do we need a museum for? We're living the real deal. I always wondered what it would be like if dinosaurs would visit a museum, see all the footprints, all the skeletons wired together and all that. Would they be sad? Would they be upset because the exhibits don't really capture the fullness of our lives? Would they say, "Ah, those were the days. Boy, remember when we ruled the earth?" So we've been to Jewish museums. Once when our kids were very small, we stopped into a Jewish museum, and two things stuck with us. One was seeing the very first Soncino edition of Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, the great guide of Jewish law. It's about the 70th Hebrew book ever printed in the history of printing, around the year 1490. When one of the kids saw it, he said, "Oh, what halachas were they learning?" He knew the book because we used to learn a halacha or two a day from the Rambam's list of mitzvahs. So it was not some artifact in a glass case. It was a text that he also learned and was familiar with. The other item in the same museum was a beautiful wooden sukkah, dedicated with hand-painted scenes from fields and woods with animals, birds, castles. But when we went around to the back of the sukkah, we saw that there were numbers on each panel, 14 and 14, 15, 15, 16, so that when the dad put it away in the garage in 16th century Germany, he'd be able to put the pieces together in the right order next year. Anyone who noticed these numbers on the outside of our shul sukkah knows just what that was. So, Jewish museums. It's interesting to see your life presented as history in a glass case like a dinosaur. But the exhibit we saw at the RUM earlier this week was not about Jewish life so much as Jewish death. Hard to say that you recommend this exhibit. It is important, it is impactful, and it did get some really good conversation going when we got back to Shul to process together all our impressions and our feelings. One observation, just to stir the pot a little bit, there was this big exhibition case of items that people brought on the trains with them that were taken from them on their arrival at Auschwitz. And they were stored in these storage houses of these looted items of valuable things named by the prisoners. If you know the history of the place, they called it Canada because it was a land of plenty. So in this glass case, there were hairbrushes, there were eyeglasses in cases, there were children's shoes, hand mirrors, and I counted seven potato graters. My question was, of 1 million Jews deported to Auschwitz, not one pair of tefillin, not one siddur, not one little Kiddush cup or Shabbos candlesticks? A little surprising. Truth of the matter is, we actually discussed this very exhibit 2 years ago when we read Dara Horn's book titled People Love Dead Jews. If you didn't have a chance to read that book with us, some of the chapters are very worthwhile, thought-provoking. There's a chapter on this particular exhibit which has been traveling around North America for a number of years. Dara Horn herself saw it in New York in 2019, and she writes, "It corrects every annoying minor flaw in every other Holocaust exhibition I've ever seen. It gets absolutely everything right. And it made me never want to go to another one of these exhibitions ever again." She says it occurs to her that perhaps presenting all these facts has the opposite effect from what we think. Perhaps we are giving people ideas. She explains herself. She says, "I don't mean we're giving people ideas about how to murder Jews. I mean that perhaps we're giving people ideas about our standards. Yes, everyone must learn about the Holocaust so as not to repeat it. But this has come to mean that anything short of the Holocaust is, well, not the Holocaust. The bar is rather high. Shooting people in a synagogue in San Diego or Pittsburgh isn't systemic. It's the act of a lone wolf, and it's not the Holocaust. The same is true for arson attacks against two different Boston area synagogues, followed by another simultaneous attacks on Jewish institutions in Chicago a few days later, along with physical assaults on religious Jews on the streets of New York, all of which happened within a week of my visit to the Auschwitz show. Lobbing missiles at sleeping children in Israel's Kiryat Gat is not an attempt to bring death to the Jews, no matter how frequently the people lobbing the missiles broadcast those very words. One thing from the book, which was published September 7th, 2021, 3.5 years ago, Horn writes, "Doxing Jewish journalists is definitely not the Holocaust. Harassing Jewish college students is also not the Holocaust. Trolling Jews on social media is not the Holocaust either, even when it involves photoshopping them into gas chambers. It's quite amazing how many things are not the Holocaust." She wrote this book before October 7th, obviously, before the hostages, before the encampments, before shuls like ours in many countries were vandalized and attacked, and before two young people were assassinated in the streets of Washington, D.C., coming out of a Jewish event. Well, still not the Holocaust, right? For those of us, and the docent who showed us around the exhibit on Sunday, she included herself in this, those who grew up exposed to a lot of Holocaust imagery and literature. Remember, it wasn't even until 1977 that the miniseries appeared on TV. We watched it here a couple of years ago on video. There was an era when Jewish kids and adults were exposed to a lot of Holocaust, with the instruction, remember, and don't forget, as if we could. Surely it's not us, but the children of perpetrators and the children of bystanders who should be going to this Auschwitz exhibit and other such informational and cautionary exhibits of what happens if you don't check authoritarianism in your society and if you allow governments to blame scapegoats for problems. Surely everyone, certainly everyone who votes, should be made to know about how things fall apart. We're on the lookout for tyrants, those who use their power to scapegoat and abuse that power. The Jews are already preset to the Niemöller test. Remember that German pastor who analyzed his own complacence during the 1930s? He said, first they came after the communists. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. At the end, he says, and then finally they came for me, and by then there was nobody left to speak up. But then again, perhaps it is for us to recall, because in our Sheish Zechiros, our 6 remembrances, which you can find in your Siddur, on page 176, 177, right after Shachris, there are these 6 remembrances that some people suggest a Jew should think of every single day. One of these is to remember Amalek and how Amalek attacked us by surprise on our journey out of Egypt and preyed upon us, those of us least able to defend themselves. Therefore, we have to remember that horrible attack of Amalek on the Jewish people and not to forget it ever. If a year's time causes a person to forget, then we make sure we remember this passage at least once a year. The Shabbos before Purim, we read these 3 verses from the end of Deuteronomy out loud, so as never to forget the surprise attack of this nation upon us. Purim itself commemorates the downfall of Haman, an Agagite and a descendant of Amalek who planned a genocide against us. So that's the remember part, but many opinions suggest that not to forget is a daily mitzvah, or even more pressing, a mitzvah of every moment of our lives. In that sense, maybe Holocaust remembrance is more of a pressing obligation than many are willing to admit. If the most cultured and advanced and educated society in modern times could turn all of its planning and operational and mechanical expertise into an industry of murder and use those skills and talents and abilities to murder 6 million of us, men, women, and children, then perhaps our obligation to remember requires more frequent attention than once a year or so. One more snapshot to share with you. This week, Thursday night, the Canadian Christian College invited me to pray for peace in Jerusalem with them. How do you turn down an invitation like that? It happened to be at the Nova exhibit, which, as some of us have discussed at the Kiddush, is not for me. Not something that was on my schedule or my to-do list. It seems too awful, too painful, too current, too immediate. Hostages are still being held, aren't they? Their release is what we've been davening for every day for 613 days, isn't it? It was very comforting to meet some of the extended KST family who've been working to put on that exhibit. Even with that, it was really more than I was ready for to listen to the survivor speaker who told her story being there at Nova that morning of October 7th. For those who have been to the exhibit and those who haven't or won't, the motto of the place is "We will dance again." Seeing that and digesting that was really at that moment that it sank in for me that on the day of the attack across Israel's southern border, we were all dancing, all of us. The day of the beginning of Milchemet Simchat Torah, the Simchat Torah war, the entire Jewish people around the world was dancing. It was Simchas Torah. Is that what makes us such a threat? That we can keep on rejoicing no matter what happens? Any event, after the survivor speaker told her story, the faculty of Canadian Christian College and its leadership invited me and a number of others from the Jewish community to pray for the welfare of Israel, as it says, as they quoted very frequently from Psalm 122. They also announced the founding of a nonprofit organization for Christians to support Israel. That's a good thing because everyone in any sphere of public Israel advocacy admits that Israel needs all the advocates it can get. The leader of the college was the most enthusiastic MC of this session. It was noteworthy that he caught himself twice referring to this young Israeli woman who told about her experience being captured by terrorists at the Nova Festival. He kept calling her a Holocaust survivor. Second time he heard himself saying it, he mused, well, it is a continuation of that, isn't it? And then, about 8:30 Thursday night, as we were in the middle of this program, we got the news that Israel had launched the first strikes on Iran. Immediately, this Christian leader said, here again, we have Israel as the only one fighting evil. Israel is fighting our battles for us. The rest of the comments were political, and that I had to tune out. All in all, it was a lot to absorb for 1 week, that is for sure. In Behaalosecha, which we'll read this Shabbat morning, we read Al Pi Hashem Yachnu V'Al Pi Hashem Yisal. It was after nearly a year of encampment at Mount Sinai that the Jewish people moved on towards Israel. Not until next week that we learned the journey would take much longer than we thought it might have. But this verse of Al Pi Hashem Yachnu, according to God's instruction we camped, and according to God's instructions we traveled, suggests to us that wherever we go, whatever we do, it's all part of our life. Not only that, both the travels and the encampments should be integral parts of our life, and they should not stop us from living our Jewish lives. Perhaps one message that's churning in my mind after this week is, do we want our Judaism to wind up in a museum display case? Or do we make it a living, breathing, day-to-day, moment-to-moment event? Wherever we go, wherever we stay, if it's for a day, a year, a generation, or 3 generations, we should recognize that we can accomplish great things there in living a real and authentic and meaningful Jewish life. Once we had spent a lovely Shabbos in Venice with the community there and a lot of tourists, and at the end of Shabbat, they went to the Jewish Museum display cabinets and they took out the candle holder and the spice box from the display and they used them to make Havdalah. When they passed the spice box around, you could see that it still had the museum tag hanging from it. So during the week, it masqueraded as a museum exhibit, but Saturday night got to live its real life as a Havdalah spice box. Rashi's comment on the beginning of Behaalosecha is that when Aaron would light the menorah, he held the flame to the wick until the flame was on fire by its own. Oila me'aleha is Rashi's comment. Our happy task seems to be this, not only to keep the light of the menorah, of Torah, of Yiddishkeit live and aflame, we are also charged with illuminating the new wicks, the next generation and generations of Jews, keeping those lights shining until their light shines all on its own. May we all merit to continue doing that, however we do it, with success, in good health, and in peace. Shabbat Shalom.